The aristocrat who left everything to grow potatoes. Leo Tolstoy. What does it mean to truly live? Not merely to exist, to drift through days marked by routine and expectation, but to engage with life in a way that feels authentic, meaningful, and deeply real. We are often told that success is measured by accumulation of wealth, of status, of possessions. We are encouraged to climb ladders, to achieve, to consume. Yet beneath this relentless pursuit, a quiet disquiet often stirs. A question whispered in the stillness between breaths: is this all there is? Is there a deeper current to human experience? A more profound way of being in the world than the one prescribed by societal norms and material ambitions? Consider the story of Leo Tolstoy, a man born into immense privilege, a celebrated author whose name resonated across continents, a titan of literature. He possessed the very things society deems desirable: a vast estate, aristocratic lineage, intellectual acclaim, and the freedom that wealth often affords. Yet, at the height of his powers, he made a choice that baffled his contemporaries and continues to provoke thought. He renounced his titles, his wealth, his literary fame, and sought to live a life of radical simplicity, embracing manual labor, and famously, even dreaming of growing potatoes. This wasn't a mere whim, it was a profound existential crisis made manifest in action, a dramatic rejection of the life he knew for an unknown path guided by an unwavering search for truth. His departure from Yasnaya Polyana, his ancestral home, was not just a physical movement, but a seismic shift in his understanding of what it means to be human, to be good, and to find purpose. This script embarks on a journey to understand this extraordinary decision, not as an isolated eccentricity of a literary genius, but as a potent exploration of universal human yearnings. We will delve into the heart of Tolstoy's transformation, seeking to uncover the philosophical bedrock upon which such a radical reorientation of life was built. What were the forces that propelled a man of his stature to abandon the gilded cage of his existence? What truths did he believe lay hidden? In the soil, in the sweat of his brow, in the quiet dignity of labor? This exploration is not an academic exercise. It is an invitation to confront our own deeply ingrained assumptions about happiness, fulfillment, and the very definition of a life well lived. It asks us to consider whether the conventional markers of success might, in fact, be barriers to a more profound engagement with ourselves and the world around us. We will trace the contours of Tolstoy's inner struggle, examining how a man who had mastered the art of storytelling came to believe that the most important narrative was the one he lived, not the one he wrote. His quest for authenticity led him to question everything: the nature of property, the role of the state, the meaning of faith, and the essence of love. In his radical simplicity, he sought a connection to something more fundamental, a grounding in the tangible realities of existence that his privileged life had perhaps obscured. This is the story of a man who, in seeking to escape the complexities of his own making, stumbled upon a profound simplicity that held the key to a deeper understanding of humanity. It is a story that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the foundations of our own lives, and to consider the possibility that true freedom might lie not in having more, but in needing less. We will walk with Tolstoy as he sheds the layers of his former identity, seeking a truth that resonated not in the halls of power or the salons of the elite, but in the quiet hum of the earth and the honest labor of his hands. This journey is an invitation to introspection, a gentle nudge towards questioning the narratives we have inherited and the paths we have been conditioned to follow, ultimately leading us to ponder what it truly means to leave everything behind, and in doing so, to find oneself. Tolstoy's radical departure wasn't merely a rejection of material comfort, it was a profound engagement with the ethical implications of ownership and social stratification. He grappled intensely with the concept of private property, viewing it as a fundamental injustice that inherently created a divide between those who possessed and those who lacked. His aristocratic upbringing, while affording him immense personal freedom, also burdened him with the guilt and moral dissonance of benefiting from a system he increasingly saw as exploitative. This wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, agonizing process of intellectual and spiritual reckoning. He meticulously examined the foundations of inherited wealth, questioning the legitimacy of profiting from land and labor that were not directly his own. For Tolstoy, the very act of owning vast tracts of land, while others toiled without adequate sustenance, was a moral stain. He saw the feudal system, even in its attenuated 19th-century form, as a perpetuation of serfdom, a system where human dignity was compromised by economic dependency. This ethical imperative to divest himself of what he considered unearned privilege became the driving force behind his desire to live a life of manual labor, a direct counterpoint to the idleness and detachment he associated with his aristocratic class. He sought a form of labor that was tangible, honest, and directly contributed to sustenance, believing this to be the most virtuous way to exist. Furthermore, this ethical crisis was deeply intertwined with his evolving understanding of Christianity. Tolstoy's interpretation of Jesus' teachings diverged sharply from the institutionalized doctrines of the Orthodox Church. He focused on the Sermon on the Mount, particularly the injunctions against swearing oaths, resisting evil with force, and the condemnation of wealth. He believed that the true essence of Christ's message lay in radical love, known resistance, and a rejection of worldly power and possessions. This led him to a form of Christian anarchism where he advocated for a society based on voluntary cooperation and mutual aid, free from the coercive power of the state and the corrupting influence of organized religion. His desire to grow potatoes, therefore, was symbolic of this larger philosophical and spiritual commitment. It represented a return to the elemental, a direct connection with the earth that sustained all life, and a rejection of the artificial constructs of social hierarchy and economic inequality. He was not simply renouncing his past. He was actively trying to construct a new way of being that aligned with his deepest moral convictions, even if it meant living a life that appeared impoverished and arduous to the outside world. Another crucial layer to this transformation was Tolstoy's profound disillusionment with the intellectual and artistic elite of his time. While he was a celebrated literary figure, he increasingly felt that his writings, and indeed much of the art and philosophy produced by his peers, were disconnected from the lived realities of the common people. He saw a chasm between the abstract concerns of intellectuals and the concrete struggles for survival faced by peasants and laborers. This sense of alienation fueled his desire to immerse himself in their world, to understand their experiences firsthand, and to contribute to their well-being through direct practical action rather than through eloquent prose. He believed that true wisdom was not found in philosophical treatises or grand artistic statements, but in the simple, honest labor of the hands and the direct experience of life's fundamental challenges. His aspiration to grow potatoes was an attempt to bridge that chasm, to find meaning and authenticity in the most basic human activities, and to divest himself of the perceived superficiality of his former intellectual circles. He sought a form of truth that was rooted in the soil, not an abstract thought. A truth that could be felt in the calloused hands and the tired muscles. A truth that was accessible to all, not just the educated elite. Tolstoy's quest for authenticity also became deeply entwined with his critique of societal hypocrisy, particularly concerning the performative nature of morality and faith among the aristocracy. He observed that many of his peers espoused noble ideals and religious sentiments in public, yet their private lives were often characterized by simple indulgence, deceit, and a profound indifference to the suffering of others. This disconnect between outward profession and inner reality struck him as a deep betrayal of genuine human connection and spiritual integrity. His decision to embrace manual labor was an attempt to live a life that was transparent and consistent, where his actions directly reflected his beliefs, however simple or challenging those beliefs might be. He sought a form of existence where there was no pretense, no mask to wear, and where the dignity of honest work superseded the hollow rituals of social politeness. This yearning for unvarnished truth led him to re-examine the very nature of human interaction, moving away from the superficialities of salon conversations and aristocratic gatherings towards a more direct, unmediated engagement with the world. The image of him, the world-renowned author, engaging in the backbreaking work of tilling the soil, was a powerful statement against the artificiality he perceived in his former life. It was a deliberate shedding of the veneer of status and intellectualism, an embrace of the elemental truths that bind all humans, regardless of their social standing. This search for unadulterated truth also manifested in his evolving views on education and the transmission of knowledge. Tolstoy became deeply critical of traditional schooling systems, which he believed often stifled creativity and critical thinking, instead promoting rote memorization and conformity. He established his own school for peasant children at Yasnaya Polyana, advocating for an educational philosophy rooted in freedom, self-expression, and the exploration of natural interests. His approach was characterized by a profound respect for the child's innate curiosity and a belief that learning should be a joyful discovery rather than a coercive imposition. He saw the act of teaching not as filling an empty vessel, but as nurturing a burgeoning flame. This emphasis on genuine understanding and personal growth extended to his own life. He didn't want to be intellectually taught how to live, but rather to discover how to live through direct experience and honest reflection. His desire to grow potatoes was, in a sense, a form of self-education, a practical curriculum in humility, patience, and the fundamental processes of life. He was learning from the earth, from the cycles of growth and decay, in a way that he felt no book or lecture could truly replicate. This hands-on approach to understanding the world was a direct challenge to the intellectual detachment he felt characterized much of learned society. Moreover, Tolstoy's philosophical journey was deeply influenced by his wrestling with the concept of death and the fleeting nature of human existence. As he aged, the awareness of mortality became more acute, prompting him to question the ultimate value of worldly achievements and societal recognition. He began to see that the pursuits that had once seemed so important, literary fame, social standing, even personal comfort, were ultimately ephemeral in the face of death. This existential confrontation with finitude fueled his urgent desire to live a life of genuine meaning and purpose, a life that would resonate beyond the brief, the span of his earthly existence, he sought a form of living that was not merely about accumulating experiences or accolades, but about cultivating an inner spiritual life, a connection to something eternal. His move towards simplicity and manual labor was, in part, an attempt to strip away the distractions and illusions that obscured this deeper reality. By engaging in fundamental, life-sustaining activities, he felt he was connecting with the enduring rhythms of nature and the universal human condition, finding a sense of peace and grounding that transcended the anxieties of his own mortality. The act of cultivating the land, of nurturing life from seed to harvest, offered him a tangible metaphor for spiritual growth and a connection to the ongoing cycle of life and death. It was a way of participating in something larger than himself, something that would continue long after he was gone. Tolstoy's radical shift wasn't solely about rejecting external markers of status. It represented a profound internal reorientation towards understanding the nature of true happiness, not as a fleeting emotional state, but as a consequence of living in accordance with one's deepest moral convictions. He observed that the pursuit of pleasure and comfort, the very hallmarks of his privileged existence, often led to a pervasive sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction. This paradox, that seeking happiness often leads to its evasion, became a central theme in his later philosophical writings. He began to articulate a vision of happiness rooted in renunciation, in the voluntary curtailment of desires, and in the embrace of simplicity. This was not an endorsement of asceticism for its own sake, but a pragmatic recognition that our capacity for contentment is inversely proportional to the complexity and extravagance of our wants. By choosing to cultivate potatoes, Tolstoy was not merely performing manual labor. He was actively practicing a philosophy of desire management, a deliberate cultivation of a life where basic needs were met through direct effort, thereby reducing his reliance on the capricious whims of fortune or the exploitative systems of the time. This grounded him in a tangible reality, a realm where effort yielded direct, understandable results, a stark contrast to the often abstract and elusive nature of intellectual or social achievements. Furthermore, Tolstoy's decision illuminated a deep-seated skepticism towards the efficacy of intellectual discourse in resolving fundamental human problems. While he himself was a master of reasoned argument and profound literary analysis, he came to believe that true transformation stemmed not from abstract comprehension, but from visceral, embodied experience. He saw how easily intellectual understanding could remain detached from lived reality, allowing individuals to rationalize injustices or to intellectualize away their moral responsibilities. His embrace of manual labor was a conscious effort to bridge this gap, to immerse himself in the tangible realities of sustenance and effort, thereby fostering a more authentic and unmediated understanding of the human condition. He sought to learn the language of the hands alongside the language of the mind, believing that genuine wisdom arose from the synthesis of both. This meant engaging in activities that were not only physically demanding but also spiritually grounding, activities that connected him to the fundamental processes of life and labor that sustained humanity. The act of planting, nurturing, and harvesting became a profound educational experience, a living parable of growth, patience, and interconnectedness, far more potent than any philosophical treatise. Consider how this applies to moments in your own life when you've felt a disconnect between what you know to be right and how you are actually living. Perhaps you understand the importance of environmental stewardship, yet find yourself caught in habits of consumption that contradict this knowledge. Or maybe you recognize the value of deep, meaningful relationships, but consistently prioritize superficial interactions due to busyness or a fear of vulnerability. Tolstoy's journey offers a potent example of what happens when that dissonance becomes unbearable, prompting a radical restructuring of one's life to align action with conviction. His choice to grow potatoes was not an escape from complexity, but a deliberate simplification of the external world to facilitate a more profound internal coherence. It was a commitment to living out his principles in the most direct and unadorned manner possible, a testament to the belief that authenticity is not found in eloquent pronouncements but in the quiet, persistent practice of one's deepest truths, even when those truths demand a radical departure from the comfortable and the conventional. This pursuit of lived truth, divorced from societal accolades or intellectual validation, became the bedrock of his transformed existence, a continuous practice of aligning his inner compass with the external world through the most fundamental of human endeavors. The earth, in its immutable cycles, offered him a constant, grounding presence, a teacher of patience and perseverance that transcended the ephemeral nature of human opinion or societal trends. Tolstoy's turn toward manual labor and a life of agrarian simplicity was also a profound response to his deepening understanding of the human capacity for self-deception, particularly as it pertained to the intellectual justification of privilege. He observed how readily individuals, especially those in positions of power or comfort, could construct elaborate rationales for their status, often framing it as a natural order or a reward for inherent merit, rather than a product of historical accident and systemic advantage. This intellectual acrobatics, he believed, served to insulate them from the moral implications of their good fortune and the suffering of those less fortunate. His desire to grow potatoes was, in essence, a radical act of stripping away these intellectual justifications, forcing himself into a direct confrontation with the fundamental realities of sustenance and effort. The earth, in its unyielding demands, offered no room for sophistry. Its rewards were directly proportional to labor, its challenges undeniable. This was a stark contrast to the abstract debates and philosophical justifications that often characterized the salons and studies of his peers. By engaging in the tangible work of cultivation, Tolstoy sought to dismantle the mental frameworks that allowed for the perpetuation of inequality, believing that a return to basic, honest labor could reveal truths that abstract thought often obscured. Furthermore, this embrace of the elemental was a deliberate counterpoint to his growing awareness of the spiritual emptiness that could accompany a life of intellectual pursuit, divorced from practical engagement. He saw how readily the mind could become a labyrinth of abstract concepts, leading individuals further away from a visceral connection to life itself. The act of tilling the soil, of planting seeds, and witnessing their growth, offered a grounded, cyclical rhythm that spoke to a deeper, more fundamental aspect of existence. It was a way of participating in the ongoing miracle of life, a process that unfolded with a natural, unforced logic entirely distinct from the often convoluted and contested logic of human thought. This connection to the natural world, he felt, provided a more reliable source of spiritual sustenance and a clearer path to inner peace than the often turbulent landscape of intellectual debate. The simplicity of agrarian life, with its reliance on the rhythms of nature, offered a refuge from the anxieties and complexities that plagued the modern, industrialized world, and indeed, the modern, intellectualized individual. Consider how this applies when you find yourself intellectually convinced of a certain ethical stance, but struggle to translate that conviction into your daily actions. Perhaps you understand the benefits of mindfulness, yet find your mind constantly racing unmoored from the present moment. Tolstoy's choice to engage in physical labor offers a powerful analogy for bridging that gap. It suggests that sometimes, the most effective way to embody a principle is not through further contemplation, but through a direct, often demanding, physical engagement with the world. The act of physically grounding oneself, of committing to a task that requires patience and perseverance, can recalibrate the inner landscape, making abstract ideals feel more tangible and achievable. This wasn't about abandoning intellect, but about recalibrating its role, ensuring it served a life lived in accordance with deeper, felt truths, rather than becoming an end in itself. The earth, in its silent persistence, served as a constant reminder of the enduring power of simple, consistent effort, a lesson he sought to internalize through the very act of cultivating his own sustenance. Tolstoy's rejection of his heritage and embrace of manual labor also stemmed from a profound disillusionment with the superficiality of intellectual discourse in addressing existential suffering. He observed that while philosophers and writers could eloquently dissect the human condition, their pronouncements often failed to alleviate the raw visceral pain of loss, poverty, or illness. The comfort of abstract thought, he argued, could become a sophisticated form of avoidance, a way for the privileged to engage with suffering from a safe, detached distance. His aspiration to grow potatoes was, therefore, a deliberate immersion into the very grit and reality of life that intellectualism could sometimes sanitize. It was a commitment to a form of knowing that was felt in the bones, in the calloused hands, rather than merely apprehended by the intellect. He sought a tangible connection to the fundamental processes of life and death, a connection that the abstract contemplation of morality or art, however brilliant, could not fully provide. He believed that true understanding of human struggle required not just intellectual comprehension, but a shared experience of its burdens. Furthermore, this pursuit of embodied knowledge was deeply connected to his evolving understanding of faith, which moved away from dogma and ritual towards an internalized, ethical imperative. Tolstoy found that the institutionalized religions of his day often prioritized outward adherence to creed over the inward cultivation of love and compassion. He saw how readily religious pronouncements could be used to justify social hierarchies and economic inequalities, a practice he found abhorrent. His engagement with the land, with the simple, honest work of sustenance, became a form of spiritual practice, a way of living out his understanding of Christ's teachings in their most elemental form. The act of nurturing life from the soil, of participating in the natural cycles of growth and decay, offered him a direct experience of divine order, a testament to a force greater than human constructs. This was a faith rooted not in theological debate, but in the quiet, persistent miracle of existence itself, a miracle he felt most keenly when his hands were in the earth. Consider how this applies when you encounter a problem that feels overwhelming, something that intellectual analysis alone doesn't seem to solve. Perhaps it's a persistent creative block, or a difficult interpersonal conflict that defies logical resolution. Tolstoy's example invites us to consider whether a shift in our mode of engagement, a move from purely mental processing to a more embodied, hands-on approach, might unlock new avenues of understanding. Engaging in a simple, repetitive physical task, whether it's gardening, knitting, or even meticulously organizing a space can sometimes quiet the overactive intellect, allowing intuition and deeper, more fundamental insights to surface. It's about finding a way to do that is also a way to be, a method of aligning inner states with outer actions in a manner that bypasses the often confusing complexities of abstract thought. His desire to grow potatoes wasn't just about food, it was about cultivating a state of being, a grounded presence that informed his entire philosophy. Reflecting on this journey so far, we find ourselves at a pivotal juncture, where the myriad currents of Tolstoy's profound reorientation converge. It's as if the intricate tapestry of his intellectual and spiritual wrestling, woven through his critiques of societal structures, his redefinition of authentic happiness, and his deeply personal quest for embodied truth, has begun to reveal a singular, compelling pattern. The echoes of his radical renunciation, his turning away from the gilded edifice of his former life towards the elemental soil, resonate not as a mere historical anecdote, but as a potent inquiry into the very architecture of a meaningful existence. We have traced the contours of a mind grappling with the chasm between inherited privilege and lived ethical conviction, a mind seeking to reconcile the abstract ideals of love and justice with the tangible realities of human endeavor. The dissonance he felt, the profound unease that spurred his transformation, speaks to a universal yearning for coherence, for a life where the inner landscape aligns seamlessly with the outer expression, where actions are not merely performative, but are the authentic outpourings of deeply held beliefs. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider the cumulative effect of these explorations. Much like observing a landscape gradually illuminated by the rising sun, the sharp edges of individual concepts begin to soften, revealing the interconnection of his ethical imperatives, his pursuit of genuine well-being, and his deeply felt need for an existence unburdened by artifice. The very act of turning towards the earth, towards the fundamental rhythms of cultivation, becomes a metaphor for a more profound internal cultivation, a deliberate shedding of the extraneous to unearth the essential. This journey has illuminated, not a simple prescription for living, but a powerful invitation to question the very foundations upon which we build our own perceptions of value and fulfillment. The seeds of inquiry planted throughout these discussions now begin to sprout, prompting a deeper contemplation of how we, too, might cultivate a more authentic and resonant way of being in the world, finding meaning not in the accumulation of external validation, but in the quiet, persistent practice of our deepest truths. The path forward, though perhaps not as dramatically defined as Tolstoy's, beckons us towards a similar introspection, a gentle yet insistent call to examine the soil of our own lives, to discern what truly nourishes our spirit and what merely distracts or depletes it. Tolstoy's extraordinary pivot from the pinnacle of literary acclaim to the humble pursuit of growing potatoes was not an endpoint, but a profound recalibration of what it means to engage with life's most fundamental questions. It was a testament to the idea that true meaning is not discovered in the abstract realms of intellectual pursuit or societal validation, but is cultivated through direct, often arduous engagement with the tangible realities that sustain us. His journey challenges us to consider whether our own carefully constructed lives, often built upon layers of expectation and comfort, might inadvertently obscure the very truths we seek. The earth, in its silent, persistent cycles, offered Tolstoy a different kind of wisdom, one that spoke not in eloquent prose, but in the language of effort, patience, and the quiet dignity of self-sufficiency. It was a profound lesson in stripping away the superfluous and finding a grounding presence that transcended the ephemeral nature of human opinion and societal trends. This turning towards the elemental was more than a rejection of privilege. It was an active embrace of a life lived in closer alignment with core ethical convictions. It was a demonstration that authenticity is not merely a state of being, but a continuous practice, a daily commitment to live out one's deepest beliefs. However demanding, the act of cultivating the land, of nurturing life from seed to harvest, became a living parable, a tangible expression of a philosophy that valued simplicity, interconnectedness, and the inherent worth of honest labor. It reveals a path where the most profound insights are not always found in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet, persistent work of tending to what truly nourishes us, both externally and internally. Perhaps the enduring power of Tolstoy's decision lies in its radical simplicity, a stark contrast to the often overwhelming complexities of modern existence. It offers a potent reminder that sometimes, the most effective way to navigate the profound questions of life is not through further analysis or intellectualization, but through a direct, often physical, engagement with the world. It is an invitation to look beyond the superficial, to question the narratives we have inherited, and to consider that a life of deeper meaning might be cultivated not through acquisition, but through a deliberate process of simplification. Turning towards the elemental forces that truly sustain us, the true practice begins now, in how we choose to tend our own soil. to nurture the seeds of our own convictions, and to find our own profound connection to the enduring rhythms of life.